Iran says the intervention is, quote, a red line, one Tehran says the U.S. should not have crossed. Trump calls the strikes an overwhelming success, but Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. are expressing concern over the lack of consultation and the dangers of American involvement in the conflict. And leaders around the world are also calling for restraint and a push for peace. This hour, we are expecting to hear from Pentagon officials, including Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and of course, once that begins, we'll take you straight there. But to Ottawa now, where this was the scene moments ago as Prime Minister Caine heads overseas to meetings with European and NATO allies. We are still waiting for official reaction from the federal government to last night's strikes on Iran. Hello, I'm Marianne Demain. This is CBC News Network. The U.S. strikes 3 key nuclear sites in Iran. Those were the Fordow, Isfahan, and Natanz areas. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran confirmed the U.S. bombed those locations, but it insists the nuclear program won't be stopped. Both Iran and the UN nuclear watchdog said there were no immediate signs of radioactive contamination at the 3 sites following those strikes. Let's turn now to CBC senior international correspondent Margaret Evans, who is in Jerusalem this morning and leads our coverage. Margaret, walk us through what happened.
Well, most Israelis would have heard the news in the night if they were awake. These strikes took place overnight, and we had statements from both Donald Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But people who weren't awake would have woken up to air raid sirens across the country. We had another barrage of missiles from Iran. That was the Iranian response to those strikes overnight. We had, as I mentioned, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu then taking to the airwaves, basically thanking Donald Trump and the United States for doing what he said no other nation on earth could do. That's a reference to the B-2 bombers that the U.S. sent over. They are capable of carrying weapons that are able to penetrate far beneath the surface. And that Fordow nuclear facility that you were mentioning is the one that is buried very deep, as many as 60 meters below ground. And that was the intent, was to be able to actually take that out. Donald Trump used the words obliterated. We've heard contrary reports. We're starting to hear them now from Iran as well. But have a listen to what the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said after confirmation that those strikes had taken place.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history.
And we are taking you now to the Pentagon, where Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is speaking.
In order to destroy or severely degrade Iran's nuclear program. And as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs will demonstrate, it was an incredible and overwhelming success. The order we received from our commander-in-chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear. We devastated the Iranian nuclear program. But it's worth noting the operation did not target Iranian troops or the Iranian people. For the entirety of his time in office, President Trump has consistently stated for over 10 years that Iran must not get a nuclear weapon. Full stop. Thanks to President Trump's bold and visionary leadership and his commitment to peace through strength, Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. Many presidents have dreamed of delivering the final blow to Iran's nuclear program, and none could until President Trump. The operation President Trump planned was bold and it was brilliant, showing the world that American deterrence is back. When this president speaks, the world should listen. And the U.S. military, we can back it up. The most powerful military the world has ever known. No other country on planet Earth could have conducted the operation that the chairman is going to outline this morning. Not even close. Just like Soleimani found out in the first term, Iran found out when POTUS says 60 days, that he seeks peace and negotiation, he means 60 days of peace and negotiation. Otherwise, that nuclear program, that nuclear capability will not exist. He meant it. This is not the previous administration. The President Trump said no nukes. He seeks peace, and Iran should take that path. He sent out a truth last night saying this: any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. Signed, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Iran would be smart to heed those words. He's said it before, and he means it. I want to give recognition to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Joint Staff, General Eric Kurilla at CENTCOM, who did a phenomenal job, he and his staff, all of CENTCOM. Policy across the board, this was a joint effort, and across the Pentagon effort. I want to recognize the pilots who flew those bombers, who flew those fighters, who flew those refuelers, warriors. I want to recognize the sailors on those destroyers, in those subs, on those carriers, warriors, all of them. I want to recognize our soldiers doing air defense, base defense, QRF, warriors, all of them. Every American involved in this operation performed flawlessly. And I want to give recognition to our allies in Israel as well. This is a plan that took months and weeks of positioning and preparation so that we could be ready when the President of the United States called. It took a great deal of precision. It involved misdirection and the highest of operational security. Our B-2s went in and out of downtown Tehran, of these nuclear sites, in and out and back without the world knowing at all. In that way, it was historic. A strike that included the longest B-2 Spirit bomber mission since 2001 and the first operational employment of the MOP, a massive ordnance penetrator. The mission demonstrated to the world the level of joint and allied integration that speak to the strength of our alliance and our joint forces. As President Trump has stated, the United States does not seek war, but let me be clear. We will act swiftly and decisively when our people, our partners, or our interests are threatened. Iran should listen to the President of the United States and know that he means it, every word. I want to give congratulations to our Commander-in-Chief. It was an honor to watch him lead last night and throughout, and to our great American warriors on this successful operation. God bless our troops. God bless America. And we give glory to God for his providence and continue to ask for his protection. I turn it over now to the chairman for specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for recognizing all of our folks out there doing our nation's work, and nice to see everybody on this early Sunday morning. Last night, on the President's orders, U.S. Central Command, under the command of General Eric Kurilla, executed Operation Midnight Hammer, a deliberate and precise strike against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. This was a complex and high-risk mission carried out with exceptional skill and discipline by our joint force. I want to thank every service member, planner, operator that made this mission possible. Their actions reflect the highest standards of the United States Armed Forces. This operation was designed to severely degrade Iran's nuclear weapons infrastructure. It was planned and executed across multiple domains and theaters with coordination that reflects our ability to project power globally with speed and precision at the time and place of our nation's choosing. This was a highly classified mission with very few people in Washington knowing the timing or nature of this plan. I'll refer you to the graphic on the side as I walk you through some of the operational details. At midnight Friday into Saturday morning, a large B-2 strike package comprised of bombers launched from the continental United States. As part of the plan to maintain tactical surprise, part of the package proceeded to the west and into the Pacific as a decoy, a deception effort known only to an extremely small number of planners and key leaders here in Washington and in Tampa. The main strike package, comprised of 7 B-2 Spirit bombers, each with 2 crew members, proceeded quietly to the east with minimal communications. Throughout the 18-hour flight into the target area, the aircraft completed multiple in-flight refuelings. Once over land, the B-2s linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex, tightly timed maneuver requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace, all done with minimal communications. This type of integration is exactly what our joint force does better than anyone else in the world. At approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time last night, and just prior to the strike package entering Iran, a U.S. submarine in the Central Command Area of Responsibility launched more than 24 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles against key surface infrastructure targets at Isfahan. As the Operation Midnight Hammer strike package entered Iranian airspace, the U.S. employed several deception tactics, including decoys, as the 4th and 5th generation aircraft pushed out in front of the strike package at high altitude and high speed, sweeping in front of the package for enemy fighters and surface-to-air missile threats. The strike package was supported by U.S. Strategic Command, U.S. Transportation Command, U.S. Cyber Command, U.S. Space Command, U.S. Space Force, and U.S. European Command. As the strike package approached Fordo and Natanz, the U.S. protection package employed high-speed suppression weapons to ensure safe passage of the strike package, with fighter assets employing preemptive suppressing fires against any potential Iranian surface-to-air threats. We are currently unaware of any shots fired at the U.S. strike package on the way in. At approximately 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:10 a.m. Iran time, the lead B-2 dropped 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons on the first of several aim points at Fordo. As the president stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against 2 nuclear target areas. All 3 Iranian nuclear infrastructure targets were struck between 6:40 p.m. and 7:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, that's about 2:10 in the morning local time in Iran, with the Tomahawk missiles being the last to strike at Isfahan to ensure we retain the element of surprise throughout the operation. Following weapons release, the Midnight Hammer strike package exited Iranian airspace and the package began its return home. We are unaware of any shots fired at the package on the way out. Iran's fighters did not fly, and it appears that Iran's surface-to-air missile systems did not see us. Throughout the mission, we retained the element of surprise. In total, U.S. forces employed approximately 75 precision-guided weapons during this operation. This included, as the president stated last night, 14 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, marking the first ever operational use of this weapon. I know that battle damage is of great interest. Final battle damage will take some time, but initial battle damage assessments indicate that all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. More than 125 U.S. aircraft participated in this mission, including B-2 stealth bombers, multiple flights of 4th and 5th generation fighters, dozens and dozens of air refueling tankers, a guided missile submarine, and a full array of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, as well as hundreds of maintenance and operational professionals. As the Secretary said, this was the largest B-2 operational strike in U.S. history and the second longest B-2 mission ever flown, exceeded only by those in the days following 9/11. Well prior to the strike, General Kurilla elevated force protection measures across the region, especially in Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf. Our forces remain on high alert and are fully postured to respond to any Iranian retaliation or proxy attacks, which would be an incredibly poor choice. We will defend ourselves. The safety of our service members and civilians remains our highest priority. This mission demonstrates the unmatched reach, coordination, and capability of the United States military. In just a matter of weeks, this went from strategic planning to global execution. This operation underscores the unmatched capabilities and global reach of the United States military. As the President clearly said last night, no other military in the world could have done this. I join the President and the Secretary in being incredibly proud of the air crews, naval forces, cyber operators, planners, and support teams, and commanders who made this mission possible. It is their skill, discipline, and teamwork that makes this operation possible. I am particularly proud of our discipline related to operational security, something that was of great concern to the President, the Secretary, General Kurilla, and me, and we will continue to focus on this. As we stand here this morning, many assets are still airborne, and we have hundreds deployed. I ask that we keep our warfighters on their way home and our deployed service member in our thoughts. Our joint force remains ready to defend the United States, our troops, and our interests in the region. Thank you very much.
We will take a few questions, Phil.
Me?
Yeah.
So, is regime change off the table, Mr. Secretary? And to the chairman, you said the battle damage assessment is still ongoing, but do you believe that some nuclear capability in Iran remains?
This mission was not and has not been about regime change. The President authorized a precision operation to neutralize the threats to our national interests posed by the Iranian nuclear program and the collective self-defense of our troops and our ally Israel.
Thanks for your question. I think BDA is still pending, and it would be way too early for me to comment on what may or may not still be there. But thanks for the question.
Green. No, behind you.
Excuse me, Mr. Secretary, can you tell me, was there a particular moment when the President decided to pull the trigger on this operation where he said, now, rather than being, something in the holster, now we're going to pull the trigger on it?
I would just say, having the opportunity to witness his leadership, he was fully committed to the peace process, wanted a negotiated outcome, gave Iran every single opportunity, and unfortunately was met by stonewalling, which is why he gave them plenty of time to continue to come to the table and give up enrichment, give up the nuclear program. But there was I won't say the particular moment, there was certainly a moment in time where he realized that it had to be a certain action taken in order to minimize the threat to us and our troops. Yeah.
General, you say that General Kurilla increased force protection in Iraq, Syria, and Gulf, in those areas. Were they given any advance warning the attacks were coming? And also, Mr. Secretary, when were congressional leaders notified? How long before the attacks took place?
Sir, to your first question, the risk has clearly been rising over the last few weeks in the region. Based on that, and not a particular awareness of this operation, we've made smart decisions to minimize the risk to U.S. forces in the region.
So they were given no advance warning?
No, sir.
And congressional?
They were notified after the planes were safely out. Well, we complied with the notification requirements of the War Powers Act.
After the attacks, they were notified?
They were immediately thereafter. Yes.
Thank you, Secretary. Two questions. Do you believe you completely destroyed Iranian nuclear program? And how about Iranian ballistic missiles? Your ally Israel always saying that is biggest threat. And second question is very important. What will be your next step if Iran or militias under Iranian influence in the region attack U.S. interests or allies in the region?
And you can chime in on this too, Mr. Chairman. The battle damage assessment is ongoing, but our initial assessment, as the chairman said, is that all of our precision munitions struck where we wanted them to strike and had the desired effect, which means especially in Fordo, which was the primary target here, we believe we achieved destruction of capabilities there. Ultimately, wherever it may be, whether it's in Iraq or Syria or bases in the Gulf, as the president said, it would be, as the chairman said, it would be a very bad idea for Iran or its proxies to attempt to attack American forces. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Regarding retaliations, Iran and North Korea are cooperating on nuclear and missile development. Do you think there is a possibility that Iran, North Korea, and the other forces, such as China, will join forces to retaliate against the United States?
Well, unfortunately, because of the policies under the previous administration, we drove those countries together, and ultimately that creates a challenging environment. For this particular operation, the focus is on Iran and Iranian nuclear capabilities. That's our focus here, is to not just say that they can't have, but President Trump has said from over 20 years, frankly, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And ultimately, he decided this is the moment, given their stonewalling, when direct military action had to be taken to prevent that from happening. Yes?
Thank you very much. General Caine, I understand OPSEC, I respect OPSEC. Can you say at all what security procedures are being taken to protect U.S. troops in Iraq and elsewhere in the Middle East? And Secretary Hegseth, as a global war on terrorism veteran, what do you say to veterans who may be concerned the U.S. is getting into another open-ended war in the Middle East over weapons of mass destruction?
Thanks, sir, for the question. I won't comment on what force protection measures are being taken in the region. What I will say is we're being proactive and not reactive, and being very thoughtful about ensuring that we do all that we can to protect our forces out there.
And I would just say, as the president has directed and made clear, this is most certainly not open-ended. It doesn't mean it limits our ability to respond. We will respond if necessary. The most powerful military in the world is postured and prepared to defend our people. But what the president gave us, as I said, was a focused, powerful, and clear mission on the destruction of Iranian nuclear capabilities. Those were the targets. That's what was struck. That's what was overwhelming. That's what was overwhelming. That's what the Iranian regime needs to understand, as the president put out last night. He wants peace. There needs to be a negotiated settlement here. We ultimately demonstrated that Iran cannot have a nuclear capability. That is a very clear mission set on this operation. Yes, hold on. Yes, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Question for the Secretary and the Chairman. How was this strike coordinated with the Israelis on a strategic level, militarily, and on a tactical level? Was there any direct Israeli military participation in this operation?
Well, I would say certainly Israel had an incredible military success, especially at the beginning and ongoing, in degrading Iranian capabilities, in degrading Iranian launchers, MRBMs. It's been incredible to watch what our ally Israel has been able to do. And there certainly have been conversations. I mean, General Kurilla at CENTCOM has worked closely in the defense of Israel for many years. And part of this operation was the defense of Israel and the ongoing defense of Israel. But as it pertains to this strike, this was U.S. operated and U.S. led.
We took advantage of some of the preparatory work that's been done over the past week and a half in terms of axis of approach. I won't get into the particulars, but as the Secretary said, it was a U.S. strike. We made sure we were not in the same piece of airspace and sky. Aside from that, that was the extent of it.
We'll take a couple more. Yeah, right there.
Question to the Secretary first. Are you concerned whatsoever now about the reaction from U.S. allies given the strike, particularly those in the Gulf? And to the Chairman, if I may, I understand you don't want to speak to specific assets and force protection measures, but do you anticipate at least having to bring in any further assets from other theaters to aid in force protection over the coming days?
We certainly understand the challenges of allies in the region, and we have been respectful and in working in collaboration with them as it pertains to basing and sensitivities there. Ultimately, they've got a lot of assets and people in those locations also where American troops are co-located. So that's a consideration of ours. We've been in close consultation with them, and we appreciate the support that we have got.
Thanks for the question on sort of the global picture. And as you know, that's one of my jobs, is to look globally at the entire range of challenges. We are always carefully considering our force posture around the world and then offering options to the Secretary and to the President. I won't comment on any future things, but the American people should know that we carefully consider those moves around the world and try to modulate as needed our force structure in the region.
Absolutely. Yeah, right here.
Thank you. What communications are being sent to the Iranians right now, and is there any possibility of diplomacy now or in the coming days?
I can only confirm that there are both public and private messages being directly delivered to the Iranians in multiple channels, giving them every opportunity to come to the table. They understand precisely what the American position is, precisely what steps they can take to allow for peace, and we hope they do so. Yes.
The president may not want an open-ended conflict. The Iranians may disagree. Are you prepared for a protracted war?
Well, anything can happen in conflict, we acknowledge that, but the scope of this was intentionally limited. That's the message that we're sending. With the capabilities of the American military, nearly unlimited. So Iran, in that sense, has a choice. But we've made it very clear to them, this is nuclear sites, this is nuclear capabilities, this is the line that the president set, and we set that back. Now is the time to come forward for peace. But I think one of the takeaways from this as well is the unprecedented level of ongoing cooperation. I can't speak highly enough of the chairman and his staff and General Kurilla in CENTCOM, what they've done to look around the corner, to pre-position, to understand how an operation like this comes together. The scope and scale of what occurred last night would take the breath away of almost any American if you had an opportunity to watch it in real time. And I think Tehran is certainly calculating the reality that planes flew from the middle of America in Missouri overnight, completely undetected over 3 of their most highly sensitive sites, and we were able to destroy nuclear capabilities, and our boys in those bombers are on their way home right now. We believe that'll have a clear psychological impact on how they view the future, and we certainly hope they take the path of negotiated peace. But I could not be more proud of how this building operated, of the precision, the sensitivity, and the professionalism of the troops involved in this effort. I will take one more. We'll take one more question. Yes, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Concerning the justification for these strikes, in March, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released their threat assessment, concluding, quote, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Caine has not authorized the nuclear programs he suspended in 2003, unquote. So what new intelligence does the U.S. have since then that the Iranians have changed their position on nuclear weapons? And does this new intelligence come from U.S. sources and methods, or are we getting this information from other countries?
Well, I would just simply say that the president's made it very clear. He's looked at all of this, all of the intelligence, all of the information, and come to the conclusion that the Iranian nuclear program is a threat, and was willing to take this precision operation to neutralize that threat in order to advance American national interests, reduce the Iranian nuclear program, and obviously collective self-defense of ourselves and our allies. So he looked at all of it, understood the nature of the threat, and took bold action I think the American people would expect in a commander-in-chief. That's all we've got. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
You were listening to an update from the Pentagon with U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, as well as General Dan Caine. He's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, both commenting on the U.S. overnight strikes on 3 nuclear facilities in Iran. Now, we heard Pete Hegseth say that the U.S. has devastated the nuclear program in Iran. He said this was a very specific operation, not targeting Iranian troops or people, but he did say that it was an operation he called bold and brilliant. Also said that American deterrence is back. Also important to note that General Dan Caine said that it appears that Iran's surface-to-air missile air defense systems did not detect these U.S. forces. So they said they maintained their element of surprise in this. They also echoed President Donald Trump's words, saying that no other military in the world could have done this and that the damage assessment continues. Let's bring in the CBC's Katie Simpson, who has also been listening to this news conference from Washington, joining us from the Washington Bureau. Also important to note there, Katie, that he said this was never about a regime change. It was about those nuclear facility sites. What was your takeaway in listening to this news conference?
I think one of the most important answers came at the end of that news conference. There have been a lot of questions about why it is this moment the United States decided to get involved in this way, and what it is that may have changed from the intelligence community, or what it is that led the Americans to get to this point. Because there had been some previous reporting, specifically from Donald Trump's own Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, that had suggested that Iran was not moving in this direction. Now, let's be very clear and take a big step back, that this is ongoing, has been a long time ongoing challenge for many different American administrations, taking on the challenge of Iran, concerns about development of a nuclear weapon. And that has been a long-standing challenge. I think a question right now for the Trump administration is what was it that sort of prompted this reaction specifically? That is not to say that this has not been a long-time issue that the Americans, the Israelis, have been trying to deal with, and specifically in the last little while as well. But a question remains for this particular moment is, what is it that made Donald Trump take this action in this moment? But again, not to negate the history that exists in this moment and the greater context around this, with the threat that Iran has posed for years and has been a long-standing concern of the Americans, the Israelis, and American allies as well. So that is one piece to sort of keep in mind there. But the Americans walked through what has sort of what took place in this moment, talking about how they sent their B-2 bombers, they sent decoys, and this massive technical operation to target these 3 different sites in Iran. The main sort of takeaways, the message from the Americans is that any sort of retaliation will be met with even stronger force. That's something that Donald Trump said last night, something reiterated by officials at the Pentagon today. Also, that the Americans are telegraphing that they targeted nuclear sites. They did not target troops. They did not target people. It was the sites they were targeting. They say that is being communicated publicly as well as privately. That's another big takeaway from this. And then the other concern is in the Middle East right now. Americans say they are taking precautions to ensure that American assets in the area are going to be protected in case there is any sort of retaliation.
Thanks so much for this, Katie. That's the CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington. And for more on this, we've reached Ali Vayaz. He is an Iran project director for the International Crisis Group, and he joins us in Washington this morning. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
My pleasure.
Okay, so we just heard that news conference out of the Pentagon wrapping up just a few moments ago. What stood out for you?
Well, obviously, U.S. military officials are portraying this attack as highly effective. I think at this stage it's really hard to judge because in the case of the Fordo facility, which is this bunkered facility under a mountain, you can't really assess battle damage from satellite imagery. You have to be able to go on the ground and see whether the Iranians had moved the fissile material out of that bunker facility, whether, if not, whether the material has been destroyed. And that would take weeks, if not months, for UN inspectors to go back in, dug out the rubble from those tunnels and basically see what has happened. So I don't think we would have a clear picture anytime soon.
Let's talk about the risks of conflict within the Middle East. Is this a gamble for Trump to launch these strikes against Iran? They said in this news conference confirming that this has been planned for weeks, even months. What is your take of that?
Look, U.S. military has had contingency plans for striking Iran's nuclear program for years. These plans have been updated over the years, but they've always existed. I think over the past few months, and especially since Israel decapitated Iran's ally in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Iran's regional deterrence was significantly degraded with the loss of Syria, the weakening of Hamas, and Israel itself in October of last year took out and weakened Iran's aerial defense systems, that there was this impression in Washington that this is a moment of vulnerability for Iran, and there's a window in which the U.S. could pursue a military solution along with Israel to Iran's nuclear program at very minimal risk of backlash. The problem right now is that for the Iranians, if they do not respond, they really risk setting a precedent that this kind of attack is something that they can absorb, and they might see more of it in the coming months and years. If they do respond, they risk inviting a much more devastating American or Israeli retaliation.
We heard Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth say that peace is what U.S. President Donald Trump seeks, but any retaliation against the U.S. from Iran would be met with force. And he said those are warning words that Iran should listen to. But if there is a wider war here, how do you see that playing out?
Look, Iran has still hundreds of ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles with heavy payloads. It has cruise missiles. It has suicide boats, speedboats, and it can still do a lot of damage to U.S. bases in the region, U.S. interests in the region, on Israel, on shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf, on energy infrastructure in the region. So it can really put the entire region ablaze. Of course, it would come at a massive cost for Iran as well, but a regime that is facing an existential peril might decide to lash out as a last attempt at survival. So the risks are very high here, but there's also a version in which Iran would respond similar to what it did after President Trump killed General Soleimani in 2020, which was a barrage of missile attacks on one of U.S. bases in Iraq, which didn't result in any fatalities, and the tensions were contained. So we'll have to see, but my guess is that where we are more likely to see escalation is the conflict between Iran and Israel, rather than between Iran and the United States at this stage.
Ali Vayyaz, Iran Project Director for the International Crisis Group, thank you so much for your time and for your insight today. We're now hearing from Canadian officials after the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. Prime Minister Mark Carney tweeted earlier this morning that Iran should never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, adding, while U.S. military action taken last night was designed to alleviate that threat, the situation in the Middle East remains highly volatile. Stability in the region is a priority. Canada calls on parties to return immediately to the negotiating table and reach a diplomatic solution to end this crisis, as G7 leaders agreed in Kananaskis. The resolution of the Iranian crisis should lead to a broader de-escalation of hostilities in the Middle East, including a ceasefire in Gaza. Meanwhile, we have also heard from Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anita Anand. She posted on X, Canada has been consistent and clear that Iran must not possess nuclear weapons as they are a threat to international security. Canada continues to support all efforts aimed at de-escalation, protecting civilian lives, and restoring stability through diplomacy. We urge parties to return to the negotiating table and reach a resolution to this crisis. And Canada has issued a travel advisory for Iran. It is urging all citizens to avoid travel to the country and to leave the country if it's safe to do so. Iran's airspace remains closed, but land border crossings into Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan are available. However, certain crossings may have restrictions. The Canadian government says consular services in Iran are extremely limited, and it cannot help with transportation or evacuation. Canadians still in Iran should make sure their travel documents are valid. Dual Canadian Iranian citizens must leave using their Iranian passports. The government also urges Canadians to sign up with the Registration of Canadians Abroad service. This helps them receive important updates and travel information. Israeli forces have recovered the remains of 3 hostages that were being held in Gaza. The hostages were identified as 2 civilians and a soldier. All 3 were killed during the Hamas October 7th attack into Israel in 2023. The militant group is still holding 50 hostages. Less than half of them are believed to be alive. World leaders are reacting to the news about the U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. CBC's Anna Cunningham is tracking the international fallout for us from our London bureau this morning. So, Anna, what are we hearing so far?
Well, Marianne, let's take you straight to the response we've had in from the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer to those U.S. strikes on Iran. Take a listen.
Well, it's clearly a fast-moving situation, and there's been a huge amount of discussions in the days since the G7 ended, and the US has now taken the action to alleviate the threat that Iran's nuclear program poses. My position throughout has been as calling for de-escalation, to get people around the table to negotiate a better outcome diplomatically.
Look, I think the British Prime Minister saying there that this US action was to alleviate the threat. That is a clear indication that Britain is supportive of the US strikes. Keir Starmer also confirming that the US gave the UK due notice, he said, before striking. And he says the British government's taken action to ensure British assets, personnel and interests in the region are protected. We've heard from the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz calling for a swift return to diplomacy. The French Foreign Minister as well, who was part of that meeting in Geneva Friday with Iran, calling for a lasting resolution that requires a diplomatic solution. And also from the European Commission President and the EU confirming its foreign ministers will meet on Monday. Now, outside of Europe, Marianne, Japan, Australia, New Zealand and Mexico calling for diplomacy, condemnation of the US strikes coming from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. China says the US move seriously violates the UN Charter. And take a look at this from the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He says he's spoken with the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. He said they talked about the detail of the situation. He expressed concern, and he says that India reiterated our call for an immediate de-escalation dialogue and diplomacy. A lot of reaction, Marianne, still coming in. Just briefly, we have heard from the Kremlin saying today that the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, doesn't intend to call the US President but a call can be arranged. Marianne.
Thanks so much for this, Anna. That's a CBC's Anna Cunningham in London. A look at Parliament Hill this hour, and we are gathering reaction from Canadian officials in the U.S. strikes, or rather on the U.S. strikes, on Iran's nuclear facilities. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand are calling for de-escalation. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre called the strikes, quote, 100% justified. Let's bring in Laurie Turnbull now. She's a political science professor at Dalhousie University, and she joins us from Ottawa. Let's start with Prime Minister Mark Carney's statement this morning. In it, he says there should be stability in the region, that should be the priority. What did you make of his statement?
I think that's consistent with what the Prime Minister's been saying all along. Some signaling that Israel has the right to defend itself. We can't allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons because of the threat to international security, but yet not going, much farther than that in terms of the language and putting the emphasis on diplomacy rather than a military reaction. And so I think we can see in the Prime Minister's and the Minister's responses, there's a kind of guardedness, and I think very much consistent with what European leaders are saying as well, that acknowledging that the strike was about alleviating the development of nuclear capacity, but now come back down, right? Go back to diplomatic channels. Don't let this escalate.
Prime Minister Carney just left this morning to meet with European and NATO allies. That's amid all of these heightened tensions in the Middle East. So what kind of discussions do you think he's having right now with Canada's allies? What will his message be to them?
Right. So again, as I said, I think we can see the consistency in Canada's response and in the responses from other European leaders around acknowledging that there is a lot of consensus that movement, any kind of the development of a nuclear program in Iran is not in anybody's interest, but yet, not wanting to have the military response go on any longer. This was a very targeted, this is response by the US. This is not about regime change. It was a big response, but it was not, it's not intended, I think, to go on. At least that's what Canada's hope is. That's what Europe's hope is as well. And so I think over the next few days, Caine is going to be in these meetings with other European leaders where we're developing our new defense program as well with European partners. It's kind of a weird time in the Canada-US relationship as we try to move away from dependence on them. I think there was, if this had happened even 10 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, there would be a real look at Canada to see, like, okay, as the US's closest ally, what will your response be? Will our response look any different? But now we are in a very transitional moment, and our partnerships are shoring up more on the European side. And so I think Caine will be of a like mind with the other leaders around that table over the next couple of days. As we, again, as we sign on to the Rearm Europe deal, as we start to chart that course and see what the next few years are going to look like for us.
What are you expecting to hear from Mark Carney at the summit?
I think we'll get more detail about what the Rearm Europe deal is going to mean for Canada. I think he's also going from there to a NATO meeting, and so we'll hear a bit more about Canada's plans for our defense program, increasing our defense spending to hit that 2% target, what that's going to mean over the next couple of years. And I think, of course, the American actions last night were not intended to be the focus of the meetings over the next few days for Caine and other leaders, but obviously they will be a big part of the discussion. And about the possibility of obviously retaliation from Iran, what that could mean, whether it comes in the form of something from Iran, something from their proxies, something from allies on their side. What will North Korea's response be? What will China's response be? And so just thinking about that broader global security picture, but I think all the while really hoping that the diplomatic channels are what we see from now on.
We only have about 30 seconds left. I do want to ask you about the tone of Pierre Poilievre's statement in reaction to this. What did you make of his statement that was released this morning in which he said it was 100% justified?
At the end of the day, I think what he says roughly lands in the same place as what the Prime Minister is saying in terms of, this was kind of a measured action in its own way, although that's weird to say given the heft of the military response. But yet, I think Poilievre goes a little bit farther in saying American actions were 100% justified. His language goes a bit farther. But ultimately, I think they land roughly the same place in terms of seeing a need or seeing value, seeing a rationale for getting to undermine that possibility of Iran creating a nuclear program, but not going any further than that. Do what you need to do, get out.
Laurie Turnbull, thank you so much for your time and your insight. Laurie Turnbull is a political science professor at Dalhousie University.